Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
When I was 17, I had a really big fascination with snipers and ghillie suits and stuff like that, and so did my friend. This ends up with us buying a bunch of ghillie suit gear and airsoft snipers. We like to camp and decide to go camp in the woods and LARP as ghillie snipers for the weekend. Be us. Our neighborhood runs along a golf course that borders a forest that goes on for ages. We have to walk through a well-lit path and then through a small strip of woods to get onto the golf course. The plan is to wait for nightfall on Friday, sneak through the golf course and into the woods, hike deep into the woods and camp for the weekend before coming back Sunday night. Prep goes well and night is approaching. Sneak out the back door and half my sister locks it behind us. My friend, who I'll call Steven, has a cheap NV monocle, so he leads the way through the small strip of woods that separate the neighborhood and golf course. We are trying our best to keep quiet and not make so much noise. Our ears abruptly begin to ring in high pitch, almost like we go deaf and we can't hear anything, like we are underwater. Steven pulls on my arm and says something, but it sounds so muffled. He starts pulling me through the brush until we make out onto the golf course. Ringing subsides and we both look at each other like, what the hell? Not the time to talk about it, so we set up to do recon over the golf course to plan the next move. I know it's not the most interesting story and the weird stuff happens when we reach the forest. If anyone is interested, I can continue. Pic related is of me taken by Steven. Didn't want to waste my time. Full moon, so it's bright enough to use our scopes to look out over the course, plus the night vision shits itself over that distance, so the scopes are a better option. As we are panning over the course, we are teasing each other with the typical, what the hell is that? Shit, it's the cops trying to freak the other out. Visible from our position is the main complex plus a few smaller maintenance sheds, along with one larger barn structure. Out of all of them, it looks the weirdest. Steven drops his voice and goes, shit man, I think there's something over there. I think he is screwing with me, so I go. Let's go then. We can sneak up there, it won't even see us. Steven seems genuinely freaked out and starts talking about how we should just head back home, but I push and say that it's probably just animals. Peer pressure gets him to crouch walk over to the building. From far out it looked normal, but as we got close it seemed to get darker. The wood was rotten and dark and it just looked derelict. There was a break in the side from which we used the monocle to peek inside, and nothing seemed to be inside. Best guess was, it was a storage barn for something like manure or mulch, I'm not sure. It was just empty at the time. The hayloft is slanted down and there is a stair leading up to it. It's pitch dark up there and none of us want to look. We suddenly are aware of a clicking noise, kinda like the clicker in Band of Brothers, coming from the hayloft. Steven refuses to go up the steps, but I really want to see what's up there, so I make him hold the flashlight and tell him to turn it on when I motion it. I try to quietly climb the steps and hold out my phone and motion for him to turn the light on, and I take pic related. Why not use the flash? Because I wasn't sure how far back it went, plus the flash on my phone kinda sucks. And I just wanted to make sure if I captured anything it was a good pic. Obviously I don't get anything, and Steven, upon hearing that there isn't anything, peeks his head up and shines the light around, and it really is empty. The clicking sound is still going on and I'm starting to get weirded out, but Steven has gotten over his fear and ushers us to keep going, so we leave the barn still staying low to the ground. As we are walking towards the forest, clouds move over the moon, so we have to switch back to the monocle. As we get further from the barn, the clicking noise disappears. The course is about a golf course or so wide, and we are nearing the entry point to the forest we were gunning for when the clouds disappear from the moon. Right before we enter, Steven takes one last look back through the scope at the barn and slaps my shoulder and points. I do the same, and I'm a little lost when Steven hisses, "Roof, look at the roof." There's a crouching figure on the roof. It looks like it's wearing clothes, but it looks almost emaciated and its proportions look exaggerated. It was looking away from us, so I didn't get a look at its face, but it just looked weird. I put down the gun and looked at Steven, and we started planning what to do. If we pushed deep enough into the woods, we could set up camp away from that thing. Steven goes, "Fuck that, let's just go home." Honestly, looking back, this was super dumb. We could have just walked back. But we were really freaked out, so that was my best idea. We jogged for about 30 minutes and we figured we made it about a mile in, so we began setting up camp. I'm gonna speed this part up. Fire kept us warm throughout the night and nothing happened for the rest of the night, and we both took shifts sleeping. In the morning, we cooked soup and then cooked meat in the broth, which was super yummy. We began the next hike, which was 3 miles into a spot where Google Maps said there was a pond. The plan was to set up by the bank, sleep Saturday night, and head back Sunday and arrive home Sunday night. We packed our bags heavier than expected, and the hike took a bit longer than planned, and we arrived by the pond in the late afternoon. We set up a bit of a lean-to against a tree and set up the fire bigger than the last. By the time we had set up with the little daylight we had, we cut down trees and gathered firewood. Neither of us were saying it, but we were a little nervous for the night, but kept putting the feeling aside. The water was kind of calming, so I think that might have played a part. As nightfall arrives, we cook the remaining meat and pour the grease over sticks to use as starters if the fire dies. We had turned the surrounding camp area into a nice little position, which helped Steven and me relax a bit more. Nighttime comes and I have first sleep. Pass out from the day immediately. To this day, even with fevers of 102, I still have not had such a weird dream. It starts where I'm in my bed at home and feel like I have a rock in my stomach. Getting up out of bed feels like slow motion, and I walk to my door to the hallway. Opening it, I'm back in the woods. Dread starts to creep over me and I go to return to my room, but the door is gone. I'm shaken awake by Steven going, dude, it's here. I shoot up and grab my airsoft gun for comfort more than anything else, LOL. The fire is dying, so I throw on a grease log and the blaze illuminates the surrounding area, and I see a figure standing behind a tree a bit ways away from our camp. We are both panicking. The only thing we had were the airsoft guns, a small baby Browning .25 that wouldn't do shit. I pulled it out of my pack regardless and pointed in the direction of the thing and squeezed the trigger. The little pop does nothing more than scare the creature out from behind the tree, in which it takes long strides further into the woods. I only have 13 shots, so I put it away. Neither of us can sleep, so I begin to heat up some water for tea while he scans the woods with his monocle. A couple of hours pass and we begin to hear rustling again, so we both are up at attention and me with the handgun. Steven starts pointing into the dark. Right there, man, shoot it. I can't see shit, so I just shoot in the general direction. The rustling keeps getting closer and we both say screw it and tumble out of our camp and start running towards the water. I look over my shoulder and see this tall figure almost shuffling through the brush towards. Steven is in front of me, so I try to aim and shoot, but it either misses or does nothing as it keeps chasing. We splash into the lake and I trip and end up dunked in the water. I recover quickly and the thing is almost upon us. Its face was weird and it looked like it was just slits in a clay mold of a face. Steven is screaming to shoot it and I raise the pistol and pull the trigger. It doesn't shoot. I clear the jam and blow down the barrel and raise it again and pull the trigger. This time I see the bullet hit the thing and it just grunts and stops for a second before it continues forward. I shoot it again, and now that I have it sighted, I just keep squeezing the trigger. Just when the gun clicks empty, the thing makes a low whimpering sound again and stops in its tracks. It leans and almost buckles, and I guess decides we aren't worth the effort and sort of lumbers off back into the woods. Me and Steven look at each other and have no words. We slowly make our way out of the water, still nervous but with the feeling that the main part is over. The camp is wrecked, and we are both wet and cold. The fire is almost dead, and we spend a while trying to get it to relight. It catches, and we just sit next to it, letting it warm us up and dry us off. It's nearly morning by that time, so we just stay up talking about whatever. At the first sign of sunlight, we extinguish the fire and pack up, throw the grease logs into the water and piss on the fire. We made the hike back to the golf course in record time. We sit just out of sight in the woodline and watch the golfers do their thing for a bit. Finish off the power bars and other snacks, just waiting for night now. We nap on and off. We retreat a bit back into the woods and get a small fire going to dry our socks. Despite everything else that's happened this brief time are some of my favorite memories. The fire was toasty and we ended up cooking some soup and chili, which tasted amazing. Talk about school, girls, and the previous night. It's kind of just a weird moment where we aren't really fazed or upset about it. It was scary, but here we are. We go check up on the course and there aren't any carts visible, so we assume that they've closed. Head back to the camp and pack up, debating running the risk of being spotted versus staying till dark. Screw it. Take the snipers and let them crawl. Take it really slow crawling through the course, as it's very open and most anyone could see us if we were moving and if they looked hard enough. All gillied up. At about the halfway mark, we hear someone call out to us, "Hey, what's going on over there? I'll call the cops." That is our cue, and we get up and start sprinting to the woods bordering our house. We reach the edge of the forest and duck into it. I quickly text my brother to have the back door unlocked. Steven and I pick up the pace and are just sprinting at this point, not really trying to stay hidden. We pass through the small asphalt path that loops through the woods and hop the back fence that leads to my house, and we make it inside and lock the door behind us. We change and pack up the gear in storage. Spend the rest of the day playing video games. We ask around, but no one really has any concrete answer about anything weird in those woods. We don't want to reveal what we did, so we just keep quiet and go about life. Steven and I are still good friends. Pick-related is a meal we cooked.
Can you further describe or draw what you encountered? I'm curious.
It's late, so I apologize for it not being the best, but its eyes and mouth just looked to be slits in its face, and the clothes it had on seemed to just be rags on its body. It was tall and seemingly pale. I wager around 7 or so feet tall. Without doxing myself, I live in the Appalachians, so I don't know if there's anything like that.
I lived in Montana, on some land my dad owns, and I was hiking up a mountain, Bighorn Mountain Range. Like most days, I heard this really weird screaming coming from the other side of the mountain, away from my house and deeper into the woods. It wasn't a mountain lion, too deep and long, went on for about 10 seconds, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't a bear. It kind of sounded like a human, except it was distorted. It sounded like someone was possessed by something, sort of like what you'd hear in a horror movie. I got to the top of the mountain, pulled out my binoculars, and looked in the general direction of the scream. I saw a weird humanoid-looking creature. It was as pale as paper, didn't have any hair or clothes or genitals, and its arms were longer than its body. It also had huge black eyes that covered most of its face. It was walking, but as soon as I saw it, it stopped and stared at me. I watched it carefully for at least 2 minutes. I remember thinking, it's staring straight into my soul. I had to look away because my eyes had started watering from not blinking. When I looked back at it after wiping my eyes, it was gone. I couldn't see it anywhere, which made me think it was a weird hallucination or something. Illusion or not, I decided to get the hell away from the area and ran back home. The scariest part is that 5 minutes after I walk in the door, I hear the scream again. It was much closer and made my ears ring. Now that I think about it, I remember that I could hear my dad yell at me whenever he needed help with something every other time I was up there. I'm pretty sure it was where I was standing when I first saw it. My dad heard it too, so it wasn't just some hallucination, and my neighbor was talking about the screams a week after it happened. I've researched it as best as I could, but never found anything fitting its exact description. I've never seen it since. My dad hasn't either. It's one of the many reasons I moved in with my mom in Arizona.
At around 14 years old in 2009, I was sleeping in bed with my mom. My dad wasn't home and she didn't want to sleep alone. I hated the dark, so I pounced at the chance to have another human present while asleep. The house we lived in had a lot of paranormal activity that friends and family also saw, so it was a welcomed invitation. To give context to the location and experience, I want to explain the layout. The bedroom door led straight to a huge bed in the center. There was a bedside on either side of the bed. The bed was a king-size mattress that rested atop a tall headboard. They didn't have a bed frame. Instead, the bedboard base was approximately the same height as a tall couch. You had to climb up onto it. The bedside was incredibly low next to the bed, and you had to half slide off the bed towards it to reach for a drink or phone. In my case, I had my hearing aid and phone at the bedside and we said goodnight. Lights out. There was nothing to note about falling asleep and no strange feelings. I was deep, deep asleep, and suddenly awoke with a huge jolt. I was so shocked and confused, and I leaned forward to check the time on my brick Nokia phone. Remember that I'm having to reach across the vast expanse of the bed and slide down towards the low bedside cabinet. I tapped the middle button on the phone, and the bluish-white glow lit up in a little bubble just above the phone and next to the bedside. I saw a huge being crouching next to me. It was directly across from my body and face while I had been sleeping. My arm passed its right shoulder to reach out and tap the phone on the bedside. I flung backward in horror and the phone light started to dim. I could see it was a palish complexion with almost textured skin that clung to their body tightly and incredibly lean. The memory that has always haunted me was how unfathomably large it was. The arms were resting upon its knees as it crouched next to me, heaving with dark black eyes staring into my own. Its face did not move. and I could recognize in its eyes that it was registering that I was freaking out, but it did not move, blink, or react. I don't know why my awareness did not bother it. It just continued to bore into my eyes as the light faded out from the room and it turned back into the blanket of darkness. I was petrified and froze for a few moments, trying not to breathe. My mom hadn't woken by my movements, and I didn't want to make a sound in case it suddenly advanced on me. I couldn't grab my hearing aid and phone to acquire more senses to deal with the situation. I didn't want to reach out and try my luck again. I was trying to process how horrifying it looked. I lay there trying to figure out how to respond. I knew it was still right there. I couldn't believe how it was tall enough while in a crouched position to be directly parallel to my face lying on this highly stacked bed structure. I couldn't stand the fact that it was directly in line with my face, and I could still feel it watching. I didn't know what to do because its limbs were so long, and I felt like it could thrash toward me instantaneously. I couldn't figure out its intentions and why it had not advanced. Its torso was tight and slender as it had been raggedly breathing, but its appearance did not disguise the strength in its body. It looked like it was coiled to move at any moment. I slowly rolled over and prayed for sleep to come. I think I stared into the darkness behind my mother's back for a while, and then it all went blank as I somehow fell back to sleep. It's the one story out of all the encounters that I've had which still disturbs me. It's the one that is truly unexplainable and unknown. My wife recently showed me a picture of a crawler after listening to a podcast, and I was left with my mouth hanging agape. It was like being next to the bed.
This occurred about 5 years ago. I'm 20 now. My mother is a veterinarian, and we have a clinic at the edge of Rockford, Illinois. Big town, roughly 150,000. However, when I say the edge of town, I mean cornfields for 30 miles plus to the west and 5 miles to the north with intermittent forestry in that area. I went with my mother to check on an overnight dog that was recovering from extensive treatment. However, there was a small pug 9 to 15 pounds also, there overnight, so I offered to take the dog out to do his business and save my mum one more chore. The back of the clinic faces a grass-covered pond/marsh. It dries up from time to time, but the grass is 3 to 4 feet tall. I don't remember if it was late winter, early spring, or even early fall, but no snow and the grass was tall, so my guess was early fall. The front of the clinic is next to a road and other commercial buildings, however. The back of the building, like I said, is very undeveloped. There were some leftover cookies in the clinic, so I, being a kid, grabbed one and munched on it as I waited for the pug to do his thing. I am not super fond of sweets, so I get halfway through the cookie and decide I've had enough. I remember the night having a vaguely eerie feeling. There are floodlights on the back of the clinic, though not so good lighting, and I didn't see anything and brushed it off as another Midwestern night of feeling creepy. It's not uncommon. If you're from the Midwest, I'm sure you can agree, but it was quieter than normal. The pond is full of sounds, frogs, and insects most of the time, but like I said, it wasn't summer or spring, so I brushed that off as well. I had lost interest in my cookie and decided I would throw it into the grass for small critters to have a good snack, so I launched this half cookie into the grass, maybe 15 yards away. I don't have a great arm and it's half a cookie, so nothing super far away. It lands in a taller thicket of grass towards the east and from the west. I hear and see something roughly the size of a deer or person take off as soon as my cookie lands, heading straight for it. I'm well versed in local wildlife, and I know how deer move, but this thing moved like a person, except it was as pale as paper and had no fur at all. I can still see its spine pushing against its skin, no arch like you get with a quadrupedal animal pulling with its front legs. Instead, like an ape or person hunched, its spine never straightened like it was niched over running in an inhuman way on 2 legs. All I saw was the shiny semi-reflective skin of its back, about 2 feet of it stopping at where the neck or shoulders would have started, and it had no large shoulder blades like a deer or dog or any quadruped. Instead had a narrow chest like a sighthound or deer, but bipedal with ball and socket shoulders. Not to mention deer don't run to things you throw in the grass. They are skittish. The second that Cookie landed, both me and the dog stopped cold. I have never been frozen by fear, but I was then, and we just watched it for 2 to 5 seconds as it ran from one end of the grass to my cookie, where it disappeared, and I heard it run away from me after getting or investigating the cookie. Once I couldn't hear it anymore, I immediately decided I was going back inside. The dog, however, was fixed and took a small tug of the leash to convince, but that was it. If you know small dogs, they are obnoxious and overly brave, barking at everything they don't know. But this dog never made a peep, and as soon as it realized I wanted to leave, was in complete agreement. I am not one for the paranormal or religion, but this was something I could never explain. I know deer, and this thing was no albino hairless deer. It was something else, with its emaciated body and pale white skin. I can still remember that night in perfect detail. It still raises the hair on my neck.
To provide some context, this took place about a year ago, more accurately October or November 2017, near my home in Lapeer County, Michigan. For reference, I'm about an hour north of Detroit, a used-to-be small town that's become more densely populated over the last decade, with a lot more hustle and bustle. However, where I live, I'm at least 1 mile away in all directions from any commercial zones or more modernized residential areas that tend to be a bit congested. It's one of the last stretches of slow, old farm country in the town that hasn't been overrun with cookie-cutter subdivisions. My house was built in the 70s by my grandfather, with whom I still reside, along with my husband, daughter, and aunt. We are his caretakers, while we save up, finish school to afford our own home. There's a sizable lot, or 3 of land, between our house and our neighbors on either side. Might be worth mentioning that growing up, my friends always said my house looked like a house you'd see in a horror film, due to its setting amongst dense trees. Some of the trees have been cut down to prepare for more houses, but fortunately for us, the builders violated multiple codes, I guess. So now there's a bit of an overgrown, expansive field. Anyway, I'm rambling. Just an inherently descriptive person trying to paint as detailed of a landscape as possible for anyone else who might find it helpful. So, it's an autumn Sunday evening and the sun has been down for a bit. Most of the leaves had fallen by now, but I recall it being an unusually warm night for that time of year. Everyone in my house was winding down for the night and preparing for the work-school week. I'd say around 10:30, I decide to let my dogs out one last time before turning in for the night. I go to open our back door, which is a giant glass sliding door wall window, and my dogs are right at my feet behind me, ready to bust out of the door as soon as it opens wide enough. I'm glad I didn't let them out because I guarantee if they saw what I briefly did, they would have both charged toward it, and it would have just been bad. I open the door, and where the edge of our yard ends and the brushy field begins. Keep in mind, this brush is a bit taller than I am. I am 5 feet tall exactly. A pale, grayish figure is standing amidst the brush at the edge of the yard. The only reason I noticed it in the first place was because the noise my door made seemed to have startled it, so it made noise in the dry, fallen leaves, which then caused me to direct my attention toward this noise. Which is when I saw it, fleetingly, duck down and take off further into the field behind my house. It's difficult to describe, but due to what I saw, being familiar with coyotes, feral cats, and other animals I'm used to seeing around the property, it had remarkably human characteristics, given its height and how it crouched over before moving in bound-like strides into the field. That's another thing I noticed, was that it didn't make the sound that a human, or any animal that is native to this area for that matter, would make in retreat. The pace wasn't quick, with multiple steps like a human, deer, or coyote. They were like lengthy, bounding strides, and the sound it made hitting the ground had weight to it. The tread was not light, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It sounded big. It kind of took my breath away, and I was left startled. But due to what I did see, believing what I saw to bear resemblance to a human, I sheepishly called out, "Hello? Is someone out here?" I'm still standing in my doorway, kind of frozen in mild fear. I yell again, "Hello?" This time a bit more confident and enunciated. This captures the attention of my husband and my aunt. My husband came downstairs to see why I was yelling outside, as did my aunt. I explained to both of them, kind of frantically, what I had just witnessed. My aunt was spooked, and my husband went upstairs to get a flashlight and his air rifle. My husband and I both go outside into the backyard, him with the rifle and light. We begin scanning a pitch-black, overgrown field to no avail at first. Maybe after 5 minutes of looking, my husband hops on top of his sedan that's parked outside to get a better view of the field or any movement through the brush, and continues looking. His gaze stops in one particular direction, though. He hops down and quietly approached me in the yard and points in the direction of what he is looking at. About 20 yards into the field, in the direction closer to the back of my neighbor's property, 2 glowing orange-red eyes are looking right at us through the brush, somewhat low to the ground. When he gets me to see what he's seeing, He decides to shoot in the general direction of this thing to maybe startle it a bit, to see how it moves. He did this several times and it didn't flinch. Then he decided he would try to aim his fire directly at it, to get a reaction. And he's a damn good shot. He hits it in, what I imagine to be the face, and it sort of jumps up, and when it landed, it was a solid-sounding thud against the ground. All the while, it did not break its gaze on us. After hitting the ground, it moved further back into the field without running away, necessarily. It kept eye contact with us the entire time, almost as if it was walking backward, not once averting its gaze. It eventually moved far enough back that we both had to jump onto the car to still be able to see it. After several minutes of this, it had moved beyond our visual, so we hopped down and went inside. It's worth mentioning that there wasn't any sort of light that would cause reflective eyes, aside from the moon, which wasn't even full, and it was very dark. We purposefully kept our lights off, and the eyes looked as though they weren't even reflecting light, but more so emitting it. Do with this what you will, but I and my husband both know what we saw, and given the frequency and variety of animals we normally see otherwise, this was significantly different than what we see. We have deer, coyotes, foxes, possums, raccoons, skunks, and feral cats, all of which we are very familiar with. We have not seen anything like this before or since this time, although we do hear strange sounds and noises in the field and the woods from time to time at night. My husband has actually woken me up in the middle of the night to listen to some strange moans and wailing, but that hasn't happened since earlier this year. I felt it was valuable to share in the sense that not all encounters are ones where whatever it is inherently malevolent or predatory, in torturous pursuit of humans. It was just an experience that struck me as particularly odd.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.